Hello, everyone, and I just wanted to welcome you to our presentation of the final rule for our 2021 MIPS program. If you are having any issues with the webinar, please chat with us in the window at the bottom right of your screen. We will do a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but feel free to ask questions throughout using the Q&A section of Zoom. We are also testing out automated subtitles to make our presentation as accessible as possible. So please excuse it from any transitional issues as we speak the language of MIPS. My name is Kirsten Hansen, and I am the VP of Sales and Marketing for Marsden Advisors. This presentation is targeted at small and medium-sized ophthalmology, optometry, dermatology, and plastic surgery practices that report in the MIPS program. Since we are focusing narrowly on those specialties and that participation option, please consult the QPP site for a full list of changes. Just a quick statement that we are providing this for informational purposes only, and this doesn't constitute legal, financial, or medical advice. If you are new to Marsden Advisors, welcome. Most of our team got their start working for EHR software companies. We launched our MIPS Success Program in 2016 to prepare for the major QPP changes that are confusing to both vendors and practices. We currently support over 200 practices nationwide and over 800 individual clinicians by taking the technical and training aspects of MIPS off their shoulders. Besides MIPS, we also assist practices in migrating between EHR systems and optimizing the use of their current EHR. In 2020, we acquired Valvue MIPS Estimator. It's a free online tool that, when used in conjunction with your registry and EHR, helps you monitor and track performance. For more information, check out mipsestimator.org. I'll now hand you off to our MIPS experts, beginning with Randy, to take you through the agenda.
Thanks, Kirsten, and hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Randy Marsden. I'm the Principal Consultant at Marsden Advisors. Today, we'll be reviewing the top changes to the quality payment program. Like Kirsten mentioned, our quality measures that we're going to be covering will be primarily focused on the specialties that we primarily work in, which is ophthalmology, optometry, dermatology, and plastic surgery. So just keep in mind when we go through the measures, we're not going through an exhaustive list. We'll also be covering the other 3 remaining categories as well. And then we'll go into how we can help practices succeed, and if you're a current customer, what to expect for next year. So in order to get started, I just wanted to do a quick 3-question survey. In just a moment, Zoom is going to ask you 3 questions. Just want to get an understanding of what specialties you guys are in, how you're submitting your data, and how confident you are with your MIPS knowledge. That will help us tailor this presentation to deliver the best information possible. So the poll has been launched. I'm seeing some responses. We'll just give that about a minute and then move forward. All right, great. Thanks, everybody. So it looks like a majority of you are in ophthalmology, optometry, and dermatology. So you're in the right place. The majority of you are using a registry with an EHR integration. So since you're ophthalmology and dermatology mostly, I assume that's Iris Registry and DataDerm, which are the registries we use most as well. And then it looks like a majority of you have some knowledge. You chose the know enough to be dangerous option. So this will be a great presentation for you, since we will be covering like more of a more advanced level than we typically do. I did, however, want to start with a quick overview of what QPP is for anyone who's new to this. The macro law from 2015 established the Quality Payment Program, or QPP. That's the program that we submit to. MIPS, MACRA, QPP are all used interchangeably, but MIPS is actually a participation pathway within the Quality Payment Program, which a majority of fee-for-service providers, particularly in specialty care, are reporting under. If you're part of an APM model, your reporting is slightly different. The presentation today is going to lean mainly on the MIPS side. Some things carry over to the APM side, but because there's so many different models and each one works separately, we are not going to be going too deep onto the APM side. If you're a current customer of ours, we'll be handling that on your kickoff. And if you have any questions for us about that, you can let us know. So same 4 categories as before. Quality reduced down to 40% and cost increased to 20%. Expect that to continue for a few more years until quality and cost are equal. That is something that Medicare cannot change. That is actually set by the macro law. On the left side, I have the current performance score versus what the payment adjustment would be for 2020, which impacts 2022. The penalty hasn't changed. It's actually going to stay at -9% for a while until they decide to start to increase it again. However, the threshold for achieving or avoiding that penalty and getting a bonus has been raised to 60 points. So if you scored below 60, then you'll get that -9% adjustment. If you score over 60 points, you'll gradually get a positive payment adjustment depending on your score. Once you go over 85, you also get an accelerated bonus that's multiplied against your standard bonus that's coming from a pool of $500 million that will be distributed to all providers depending on how you range, where you end up in that range on the top 15%. Also, there was a concept called MIPS value pathways. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. This will be rolled out in 2022 instead of 2021. And even for 2022, it will be optional. It's a new design rather than reporting across the 4 categories, no matter what specialty you're in. They're going to design kind of like bundles or packages of measures across each category that you would be required to report on, which should reduce the administrative burden. So we'll now start with the quality category, which is still worth the most out of any other category. Pretty much everything here besides the weight of quality being 40% has remained the same. So we're still reporting for a full year. The total category is worth 60 points. You'll need at least 10 points per measure, with 1 being an outcome or high priority measure. all of the same bonus points carry over for 2021 as we had in 2020, and you can still continue to report via claims, EHR, and registry. They did remove the CMS web interface. If you are in a large practice, like 25 or more providers, you may have used that. But in our opinion, the other options are much easier and allow for greater flexibility for specialty care. Another contentious thing that was in the proposed rule that we discussed on the last webinar was they were planning on abandoning historical benchmarks for 2021. If you're not familiar with what that means, you may be tracking your score throughout the year. If you're one of our customers, we're telling you what your score is from the beginning of the year through the end. And we're able to do that because Medicare pre-publishes historical benchmarks based on what was submitted 2 years prior. So you can see an example at the bottom of cataract surgery. If I was to score 92%, then I'd be in the 5th decile. So that's how many points I would get out of 10. So each measure has different benchmarks depending on how everybody performed. Due to COVID-19, they actually allowed practices to not submit and not get a penalty in 2019. So they were concerned that there wasn't enough data. There was a lot of commenting asking for them to go back and reevaluate that, and thankfully they did. So we will still be able to continue to estimate your scores and not be surprised at the end of the year, similar to what you've had to deal with the cost category. Some high-level measure changes. So there are 2 new measures, but they are administrative, meaning they come directly off of your claims. So you don't have to report any of these. They'll just be picked up if you fall into the denominator for these. In our specialties that we focus in, these would never get picked up, so we don't anticipate needing to track these. But you can find more once the specification is released on the QPP site, hopefully by next month. There were 112 measures that had substantive changes. What we did here is we just bulleted some of the most common changes that many measures shared across the spectrum. And the reason why there are so many broad changes is because when they change one value set that's used by multiple measures, all those measures get that updated value set. So for example, the medical reason exclusion, which exists in a lot of measures where you can say that you didn't do something, you didn't do the numerator requirement because of a medical reason. They've removed concepts from that value set that do not indicate a medical contraindication, but rather a provider's decision to discontinue or adjust a course of treatment. So the provider simply not wanting to without a medical reason wouldn't satisfy the exclusion requirement. And that's the same for every measure that has that value set. Also due to COVID, we've now adopted a lot of telehealth, but the coding in the measure specs didn't really know how to handle that because Medicare typically wasn't allowing telehealth encounters for typical E&M services. So in some cases, they removed telehealth encounters. In other measures, they added it where they thought that the measure was feasible to be able to do telehealth and still meet the measure. There are also updates to the long-term care exclusion value set for patients that are staying in 90 consecutive days in a long-term care facility. And they also added some advanced illness and frailty codes to help better define the elderly population. Besides me, we have our 2 client success managers on the call as well. They're going to take you through the top measure changes by specialty. And we're going to start off with Kate, who manages a majority of our ophthalmology and optometry clients. So take it away, Kate.
Great, thanks, Randy. So I'll be reviewing the measure changes for ophthalmology and optometry. Starting with measure 12, the only collection type permitted for 2021 will be ECQM. This can be done via your EHR or IRIS registry. Other registries will no longer have this measure as an option. In addition to that change, the medical reason value set was updated and telehealth encounter codes were removed. For measure 14, the severity requirement can now be met using the ICD-10 levels of severity. This expands advanced stage dry AMD to specify presence or absence of subfoveal involvement and adds the wet AMD severities to include active or inactive CNV or inactive scar. For measure 19, a technical change to the ECQM logic was updated, along with the update to the medical reason exclusion value set and the removal of telehealth encounter codes. For measure 117, the numerator will now be split into patients with or without diabetic retinopathy. We will need to wait until we see the benchmark file to see how this will be scored, but it should work like other multi-strata measures such as high-risk meds and tobacco screening and cessation. Measure 141 can only be reported via a registry. And 191 was updated to add a SNOMED code for best corrected visual acuity using a Snellen chart. You may need to update your EHR with this code if you maintain your SNOMED codes within your templates. I'll now hand it off to Renee to take you through the measures related to dermatology and plastic surgery.
All right, thank you, Kate. We have the below measures listed for both dermatology and plastic surgery, particularly for multi-specialty practices. There are only a few changes from measure 137, 265, and 410. We'll now have the telehealth encounters added. We're also waiting on clarification on how this is intended to work for measure 265, since biopsies are not done remotely. So more to come on that. For measure 410, instructions were updated to use the most recent encounter. They also added additional clarity that if the psoriasis assessment tool like PGA or BSA is not documented on the final eligible encounter of the year, but it was documented in an earlier encounter, the most recent encounter should be used to determine if the measure's requirement was met. However, we recommend just document the psoriasis assessment tool at all psoriasis follow-up visits. Measure 337, which is the psoriasis TB prevention for patients on a biologic. It was slated for removal, but they are continuing that measure for 2021. None of the plastic surgery specific measures were changed. And since we also report on some general measures for our specialties, we listed those here on the right side. If you use any of these measures as well, check out our guide that was sent along with the initial invite to the call. We'll also send you a copy along with the recording of today's presentation later today. I'll now hand you back over to Randy to take you through promoting interoperability.
Thanks, Renee. So just one more thing, something we don't know yet, some things we don't know yet on the quality reporting. When the final rule comes out, it has measure changes, what's being added, what's being removed, but it doesn't go into any more specificity than that. So Medicare is currently updating the measure and activity specifications, the data validation requirements, and the measure level benchmark data. We're checking the quality payment program site regularly. Once that's available, we'll update our material with that information. You can also check qpp.cms.gov/resource-library to see if anything updates there. Also, just a technical issue, our subtitles are only working when I'm speaking. So if you are unable to hear Kate or Renee speak, everything that was on the slide is what they said. Moving on to promoting interoperability. Same overall requirements in terms of the reporting period being 90 days. The score is, you need to score up to 100 points to get the maximum weight, which would be 25% of your MIPS score. I highlighted in red the changes. So querying of the prescription drug monitoring program was at 5 points. They doubled that to 10 now. It is still optional. So if you do not use a PDMP and e-prescribed controlled substances, just keep in mind you have to do both to do that measure. It's not just querying the PDMP. Then you can use that. If you do that, if you don't, that's totally fine. You could still earn a maximum score without that measure. In the health information exchange category, they updated the name of the receiving and incorporating health information measure to now receiving and reconciling, just to match what you're actually doing. Nothing has changed within that measure. The alternative, if you don't want to be doing the sending and receiving measures, is there is now a new alternative measure called bidirectional exchange of health information, which would replace the other two measures being worth 40 points. So if you did choose to report this one, you'd be attesting to these three statements, basically saying that you are participating in an HIE or health information exchange to enable secure bidirectional exchange for every patient encounter, transition or referral, or record stored and maintained in the EHR during your performance period. The health information exchange that you participate in is capable of exchanging information across a broad network of unaffiliated exchange partners, including those with different EHRs, and that does not engage in exclusionary behavior when determining exchange partners. This means that if you are registered with a state health information exchange, let's say you're in Kentucky, you'd want to check to make sure that that HIE is able to communicate with all EHRs that any provider in your state has, along with also participating and exchanging data with other states and regions. Finally, you're also attesting that you're using the EHR for this measure, and it lists some certification IDs, but basically all you need to know here is your HIE needs to be integrated into your EHR for this to function. You won't be able to use this measure if you have to manually transfer data between the systems. This measure actually did exist back in meaningful use days, but it was kind of removed as they were constantly making changes. So our take on this, if you are currently required to participate in a health information exchange as mandated by your state or local health department or hospital affiliation, and your EHR supports the integration, or if you're just already part of an HIE and you have that set up, then this is definitely a better option than the sending and receiving. But if you don't have any of those, if you can't integrate it and you're not required, it's probably a huge burden to get this set up. We have a shortened link right there on the screen that you can visit, which will take you to the ONC site. It lists every state's health information exchange with contact information, so you can definitely reach out to them for more information. If you're one of our customers and you'd like to look more into that, definitely let your client success manager know. However, we're already aware that a majority of the specialty EHRs that we work with do not have this functionality at this time, as it's mainly geared towards hospitals and primary care. If you want to stay with the existing HIE measures or you have no other choice, just a few things you want to think about for next year. First of all, make sure if you haven't already that you've gone into NPPES and updated your provider's direct address information. You'll see a section now called digital endpoints where you can enter in those addresses. The reason why this is important is if you've ever tried to find another provider's direct address, it's usually impossible. You can call the practice, they might not even know what you're talking about. We have access to a directory that we are able to pull for our clients, but it's a manual process. So NPPES and Medicare have updated the enrollment site to have this, and this will be available on the NPI search page that NPPES hosts publicly. So if you ever have gone in and looked up a provider, it will now start displaying the direct address. At this point, this is still optional, but they will be publishing on the site if you did not update your endpoint. So it's really good to go ahead and get this taken care of. This should help boosting your receive and reconcile numbers so you're actually getting in referrals electronically, since that measure has no exclusion if you don't receive any. Also, you could consider being exempt from these measures for the sending measure. If you had less than 100 referrals or transitions out, then you may qualify for this. The receiving one is much harder to exclude out of. And the reason why I have this here, this hasn't changed, by the way, from last year to this year. I just can't stress this more. Most exclusions are based on the denominator count, but this one is not. So if you run your reports and your receiving and reconciling measure, currently called receiving and incorporating measure, has a denominator of 0, that does not mean you can exclude out of this measure. You'll need to confirm that you have not seen more than 100 new patients or referrals combined, which in specialty care, especially in a larger practice, is definitely not going to suffice for an exclusion. So if your denominator is 0 and you have seen more than 100 new patients in your reporting period, definitely get the word out to your referring partners of what your direct addresses are, so you can get some in and reconcile them before the end of the year, and as well as 2021 if you plan on reporting this category. We'll now move into the improvement activities category. No changes at a high level. the requirement that 50% or more of your providers participate in the activity does continue from 2020 to 2021. These are the only measures that had changes. There were some new measures that were added, but we don't think any of those are relevant to the specialties that we work in. The first measure, comprehensive eye exams, they added options for referring patients to vision rehab services. So if you do offer referrals to low vision organizations, low vision clinics, or you provide material for that, that would count as well. This activity was originally not intended for ophthalmologists or optometrists, but instead for primary care to refer their patients to ophthalmologists or optometrists. But if you provide no-cost exams to underserved populations, or you're providing literature related to comprehensive eye exams and referring patients out to vision rehab services, this is a measure that you may be able to use now. The other measure that underwent a change is that the engagement of patients through implementation of improvements in patient portal has been clarified a little bit. Historically, you needed to have a more advanced patient portal and able to meet in order to meet this measure. They have clarified it now. First of all, if the patient is not using the portal, but their caregiver is or family member is, that would count, which your portal should be capable of doing per Medicare requirements for their certification. They also clarified that the portal should support bidirectional clinical information exchange between the patient and clinician. So you may be aware that for MIPS, for promoting interoperability, you're no longer required to secure message with your patients. But if you do, and you're continuing to do that, which we found very successful during COVID, then you can actually get credit for that in the improvement activity, so long that the communication is clinical in nature and not just administrative, like booking appointments or paying bills. Finally, the last category is cost. No changes to this at a high level, except for the fact that it's now worth 20% instead of 15%. If none of the cost measures apply to you, the points will continue to be reweighted to quality. There's actually been really no changes at all in this category when it comes to the measures. They're adding eligible telehealth encounters to the overall cost measures where applicable, but because the specialties that we work in are never picked up in like the total per capita cost measure unless you're a PA or nurse practitioner, these telehealth encounters really won't impact your cost score too much. They actually updated something for 2020 in the 2021 rule. They like to do that here and there. This is actually a good change. They are doubling the complex patient bonus from up to 5 points to up to 10. So that will be doubled for 2020 only due to the COVID public health emergency. That score is determined by Medicare. If you're not sure what that is, you could go take a look at your past performance in 2019 to see how you scored on that. As soon as you submit the data through your registry or the quality payment program in January, you can go right into the QPP site and instantly see what that complex patient bonus score is, as long as they kept up the same protocol that they did for last year. So if you're currently working with us, first of all, thank you. We couldn't be here without you guys. For 2021, once the measure specs, benchmarks, and data validation requirements are released, we'll be scheduling your 2021 kickoff calls. This may actually happen in January, February. We were hoping that we could get started on next year early, but the delay of the final rule, along with the updating of measure specifications and administration change, I am not confident exactly when this will come out, but as soon as it does, we will provide training on that material. For 2020, all necessary hardship applications have been filed if applicable for your practice. We will be submitting your 2020 data by March 31st, which is the deadline. We hope to get that done sooner, but we do need to wait on registries to complete their open mapping refinements that we've submitted. And we plan on doing a final data audit to make sure everything is taken care of, to make sure you're getting the best score possible. If you have any questions specific to your practice, feel free to reach out to me or to your dedicated client success manager. If you're not part of Marsden Advisors yet, but that sounds interesting to you, we have a few different ways to help you out. We know some of you are self-starters and want to continue to do this on your own, so we have made some new material available for you. I would highly recommend registering today for mipsestimator.org. It's a free account. You can use that to track your score, especially if you're submitting data between a registry and EHR. Maybe you also have claims measures. We help you determine the best score possible and see what your score is, regardless of when your EHR registries get updated for the new year. We will be switching over the system to 2021 reporting after the submission deadline, which is currently slated for March 31st. But we will have some updated educational material on the site earlier than that. If you also want to get some more information, including a copy of today's webinar, it is on our YouTube channel, and we have a short link there to direct you to that. You can also search YouTube for Marsden Advisors. Something I don't have on here, but we will be re-releasing our MIPS calendar that we release every year, which is a handy desk reference to take you through all the important deadlines. If you, at the end of today's presentation, when you close the presentation, it will take you over to a form. If you fill that out, we'll get you on the mailing list for that when that's ready. If you are interested in working with us and having us take care of MIPS for you, we are one of the few MIPS consulting companies that does provide full support. So if you didn't do anything all year for MIPS, because we get connected into your EHR and registry and work on that partnership, we're still able to get you a great score. We are still accepting new clients for 2021, but that would just be for submission only. At this point, we really can't do any refinements or audits due to how close we are to the end of the year. But if you need guidance on getting what you have submitted, we can definitely help you out with that. And then we're also accepting new customers for 2021 for full support. Our pricing starts at $900 per provider, per full-time provider per year. Pricing is different if you are part-time or limited time, and also depending on the level of support that you need. We'll be sending an email after today's call with this information, a link to sign up for that MIPS calendar, as well as all of these other resources from today. So that brings us to the end of today's presentation. Our Q&A is open. If you hover your mouse over the meeting, you should see a Q&A button at the bottom. And when you go to that, it allows you to ask questions. If that is not working for you, feel free to just chat us through the panelist chat window. It looks like we have one question. I thought retina is exempt from cost. True. Yes, if you are strictly a retina surgery practice, the only ophthalmology specific measure is for cataract surgery. So you may just want to check if you do IOL exchanges or any other like combination cataract retina surgery. Just check what CPTs you use, but most of the time we see that the CPT in use is not getting picked up by that measure, but that could be a possibility. The total per capita cost measure, which technically applies to all providers, is excluded for those who are ophthalmologists. So that's based on your taxonomy. So of course, make sure that your taxonomy codes for all your providers are set up properly. We have found some providers, when we start working with them, are set to the specialist taxonomy, which isn't unique enough to get excluded from that measure. Also, just a note, if you have physician assistants or nurse practitioners and you bill them through as the rendering provider on any of your claims, they will get picked up. They're not excluded, which could lead to you getting a score for total per capita cost, even if a majority of your care is specialty in nature. So just look out for those unique scenarios, but for the most part, retina is exempt and the cost would be moved over to quality. Next question we have is, will you send us this file for review by email? Yes, we'll be including a copy of the presentation, recording, and all of the links that we mentioned in today's call. We have another question regarding HIE measure. What if you receive more than 100 referrals coming in, but we don't refer out more than 100? Are you completely exempt? So they're two separate measures. So if you receive more than 100 referrals coming in, then you are not eligible for that exclusion. You would need to take any CCDAs that you receive electronically and incorporate them. You could exclude out of the sending one if you don't refer out more than 100. So you can choose which exclusion to use on each individual measure. That is based on your performance and based on who's asking it. I believe we have you set for the PI hardship, but you can confirm that with Renee. I don't believe you'll need to do that measure for this year or next year. Another question about taxonomy codes, are they in NPPES? I believe so. I know that if you go into the NPI registry, you could just Google that. If you type in any of your providers' names or NPIs, it will show the taxonomy. I believe that's where it's set up, but I would check with your billing or credentialing staff or a consultant for more details on that. All right, we'll give it one more minute for any additional questions.